Seasons is something that I'm always talking about with my friends when we are going through transitions, focusing when we're ready to have a good time, when we're going through grief. And honestly, life has been moving so fast. I feel like lately I have been feeling a lot of alignment in my purpose, but at the same time as I continue to grow and learn and move towards my goals, I think I'm also entering into a season of transition, or I have been transitioning. I just know that I'm not settled right now. And I think I've seen several points in my life um, where I was going through either seasons of change or I might have just been in a specific season. And so, when I think of a certain season, I really align mine with my goals and what my intention is. But at the same time, you can't control what life is going to throw your way. And so I know a lot of people will look at it in terms of the seasons, right? For winter, that's usually your time for introspection and awakening. And spring is more of rebirth, new journeys, creativity. Some people look at summer as, bliss and freedom and just expansion. And then, when it gets to fall, it's, shedding, letting go, reviewing and observing. Um, and for me, sometimes my season aligns with the actual like calendar season. I don't even know what you would call that. But sometimes, like maybe in the winter, yes, I will be a little bit more introspective. I'm spending a lot of time with family, right? Looking over the year and what I accomplished. So sometimes it will align, but sometimes, and I think it's happening now, right? The summer, that's when you're celebrating your wins. If you've been in the gym, you're outside, there's just freedom and bliss. And I don't necessarily know if I align with that per se. I think there's celebration always as far as the goals that I've achieved. And I have worked hard for my little summer body, so I will be showing that off. But I also feel like I'm transitioning from this stage of like creativity to more of just like an awareness of my purpose, an awareness of the type of people that I want to be around, the places that I want to be around. So just really aware and connected to what I am doing, what I'm taking in. So it's just this really focused perspective. But I don't feel settled in that season yet because, like I said, there is a transition. And I think we all go through it, right? I've had transitions, from being single to being married and from being married to having kids and then going through a divorce, all of those transitions. And I think as I've grown, I've handled all of those transitions differently. And it has just made me more aware, not only as like why I'm going through transition, how I'm responding, how to learn how to respond, but how to also accept the seasons that I'm in. So let's get into it. So the whole reason that this is even a topic, honestly, because we are going to be transparent, I had a really rough start to my week. And I can always know that I am about to go into a transition period or season of transition when things start moving incredibly fast. Like, and I'm saying like swift, uncontrollable changes that are happening, pivots. A lot of the time, I'll see it where I have people maybe challenging my boundaries, right? Stress, but also there's alignment to goals. So, to be more specific, the past couple of weeks, my family and I have been going through a transition as far as where we want to relocate, what that's going to look like for my kids, while at the same time, some goals that I have with this podcast. I love to volunteer and the goals there. And recently, I've had situations and opportunities that have directly aligned with my goals. And a lot of the time, my hand has not been in it. I have not had control of it. It was just simply right place, right people, right time. And when that starts to happen, I'm always like, okay, we probably need to get ready for what's to come and prepare mentally so you can add value in every space that you're in. But on the flip side of that, people start acting up. And, I think it's also like when you go through these seasons of change, your environment as a whole is changing, right? The places that you might see yourself in, but also the people you might see yourself around. And so when my week started last, I was hit with, family canceling on me, friends switching some things up on me, my kid's father going into this disrespectful rant, while on top of that, dealing with the aftermath of a storm where I didn't have Wi Fi, my kids were home. It was just a hot mess. And even the week before that, right, we talked about opportunities and alignment, all of that was happening. So there was just this weird shift that I felt in my spirit. And I just remember thinking, not only do my boundaries need to change, some relationships need to change in the spaces that I have to change. Right? You become introspective when you can kind of sit back and respond to those situations. And we'll get to that later. Uh, but how did I know, right, that my season was about to change? For the longest, I didn't notice when I was going through changing seasons. It was even hard for me to identify the season that I was in. I think I just lacked that type of awareness at the time. One, being so in the moment, but also not being connected with myself and having moments of pause and stillness to actually reflect. And to be honest, I was heavily focused on saving my marriage for a good minute. So I couldn't really identify where I was going through periods of grief, where I was going through periods of stress, when I felt really enlightened. I couldn't even really notice. And if you want to get to the physical level, now, right, I really notice when my body has changed. Like, this might be TMI for the guys, but I will notice, like, when my period is about to come. I do cycle syncing for my workout, so I'm able to track how my body is changing, how my mental state is changing through each stage. But I'll be honest with you, 5 years ago, I mean, it was like it was always a surprise. I don't know why I'm having this attitude. I don't know why I feel super bloated. I don't know why I'm having trouble sleeping. And it was because I just wasn't paying attention to myself. And honestly, what kind of shocked me back into reality of, you have to pay attention to not only the spaces you're in and the people that you're around, but what you're really feeling internally about it. Um, and to be honest, my divorce is what kicked that off. When I was single, honestly, I was flailing through bars, clubs, running into work at 5 a.m. I wasn't even paying attention. I was doing my own thing. Um, but I think my divorce really caused me to take stock of not only how I was feeling, but what spaces I felt good in, what people I felt good around, how that impacted me, and how that impacted the intentions that I wanted to set on my life. Now when I notice the swift, uncontrollable change, right, where things just seem out of whack, and I have this great connection with myself, and I do believe I have a really good connection with the Lord. To pause and invite Him into the space and really ask what season I'm about to enter into, um, and praying for grace as I'm transitioning through that season, giving myself grace. And now it really comes with a clear vision. You know, once I started doing some self work in therapy, I learned how to sit in transition and assess it. And what started happening is I started having a clear vision of my purpose and next steps. And so I said, right, my divorce was the catalyst to have me start really looking internally, evaluating the space that I was in, evaluating the people I was around and the time that I was utilizing, right? When I made the decision that I was going to file, that was one of the clearest decisions that I had ever made. And it was very swift. And when I say swift, I note it because I typically take a good amount of time to make a decision. Like I have to evaluate. I'm very strategic. I want to like look at the numbers, everything. I'm going to do the research. I'm going to ask for feedback, everything before I make a decision. Like it takes me 8 months to buy a couch. It's insane. So I know naturally how I move. So that's how I know for me, when things are moving very quickly, I'm able to make very quick decisions. One, I'm trusting myself. Um, but two, I'm taking the time to assess. So back to when I filed, there was a very clear moment in my marriage where I knew distinctly this is not going to work. And this is after trying for years and being the one driving the trying. And I remember having that thought, and the next day, that first thing that morning, filed. And let me backtrack by saying, like, this was not the first time that divorce had been brought up. This is not the first time that I had looked at attorneys. I was just terrified and scared. It's probably in a season of transition then and about to enter into many more. But I remember filing that morning. The next day, I went and found an apartment. And then the next day, I went and found a realtor. And the next 3 months of my life, I burned everything that I knew to the ground. Some of them were friendships, relationships, where I was living changed, my job changed. I ended up finding a church that I easily connected with. The people that I was around started changing, and it was very clear, laser focus. I was on a mission to now removing myself from a toxic situation and viciously pursuing myself for my kids. And in any other state, if it was really up to me, that process would take years. It did take years. And because I spent significant time in therapy, I had spent a lot of time in isolation to really assess what is happening. So when I made that decision, it was so quick, and I was level headed. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't even irrational. I was a little bit with some of my expectations. So that's a story for another day. Um, but it was just one of those things where it was so clear to me what I needed to do. I was no longer stalling. I was no longer doubting myself. And I had accepted the transition, and I had accepted the season that I was about to enter into. So I think the main question, right? It's so easy to talk about, like, I'm going through a season of change. The question is, what do you do? And honestly, I'm still figuring that out. It's been trial and error. And as I've gone through different seasons of change, it has changed. The modes of how I handle it has changed, right? And in some way, the first step is really defining. Are you going through a season of change? Are you going through a season of isolation? Are you going through a season of focus, right? Are you feeling inspired and creative and you want to dive into that? I think sitting in that, chaos or confusion, it can feel like sitting in that and looking at what's happening around you and how you and what that's bringing up in you is huge because I would want to just rush past that stage. Like I remember even during my separation, I was like, I don't want to be here. Like I want to be on the other end of it. But when I look back at it, that season of separation for me at the time was a period of being poured into, allowing myself to be poured into for the next season because I would need it. Um, and so that leads right into the next point of eyes wide open. And I think when it comes to how do you handle those seasons of change, it's really about responding versus reacting and noticing the things that you're seeing during that season. So for the example that I gave earlier, right? I had a horrible Tuesday, I had a lot coming at me. And in that moment, I knew that I could easily go into react mode and just start texting everybody how I really felt because if I had the time. Fortunately, I didn't. And I really had to, I'm not going to lie, I blocked everybody. I blocked every. I changed my do not disturb settings and I put my phone away and I went into my bathroom and I asked God, what are you trying to tell me? Because none of this makes any sense. And it allowed me, right, to one, identify what was going on and decide then, how am I going to respond to this? And in that moment, my response was, I have to focus on other things, right? I have my kids here. I'm trying to figure out my Wi Fi. I have to work. Like, I cannot put my energy into this. So I'm going to choose not to. So I'm not going to give a reactionary response to this. I'm going to take it in and identify what this actually means. And it allowed me to clearly determine what my next steps need to be, which was to continue to and to start changing up the boundaries around some relationships. But that's going to be dialogue for a whole other day. But then noticing the themes, right? Noticing, for me, for example, if I have a thought in my head and then out of nowhere I'm having a conversation with someone and then it comes up. And then the next thing I know, an opportunity presents itself. That is when I can identify, okay, you are in a place where you need to maybe level up, focus, or because things are about to move quick, because the opportunity is aligned to my goal. And this is where I love like those seasons of change where there's just this energy and this fire behind you to just be the best version of yourself in every space. And for me, right, I think the most recent example is, I was having this thought of, oh, it would be really, really cool, at some point to do some sort of live event. I had just gone to the Dear Media conference and I was like, that'd be so awesome. That'd be a great opportunity. But, we're going to take baby steps. And I put that in the back of my mind. 2 weeks later, I was having a conversation with one of my really good girlfriends. We love to just bounce ideas off of each other. And she was sharing with me just some thoughts that she had on her own nonprofit and had randomly brought up, she goes, Jaleesa, what you really need to start praying over is if you should do some live event. And what was interesting about that was earlier that morning, my brother had called and told me that his church was wanting to do a live event for women's health for mental health month, World Mental Health Month. And he thought that it would be a great idea to have me there. And that was all in like an aligned being. And it ignited in me, right? Like you are in a period where you need to start betting on yourself, light the fire underneath yourself and just go for it. And swiftly recognizing I'm going to have to change some things up to respond to that transition. And I think another thing when you're going through a season of change is really asking, what is this? Like I said, I asked myself, what is God trying to tell me in this moment? It's really trying to determine, what is this season trying to teach? What is this season trying to prepare? And a lot of the time for me, it's really looking at, do I need to change the dynamic of the relationships that I'm in? Do I need to change the environments that I'm in? Do I need to change my routine? So like the first quarter of this year, there was a heavy focus on my career. I was doing a new project, and I was working a lot of hours. But I also knew that fitness was a priority, and at the same time, I still have kids. Um, and my son was having some educational evaluation, so it was a balancing act. Prior to that time, I was in a season of reflection and really looking at my year and how I operated it. And I took those lessons and I brought it into uh, that season where I was really requiring balance. And what that really turned into is like, for when it came to people, like I couldn't be on the phone with people, past some life. I needed to sleep because I was working heavy hours. I really wasn't focused on, you know, going here and going there like I usually am, because my kids needed attention at the time. And at the same time, I wanted to grow professionally. So I made the commitment to work a lot of nights and make those sacrifices. And I'm happy that I had that period of reflection to learn about what worked well, what didn't work well, how I wanted to see myself in that next season, to really set the tone, for how I was going to handle. Um, so yeah, I think there's always a lesson in transition, and I'm always one to say, no matter what. Well, one, first of all, I am always going to take a lesson out of something. I'm leaving here with something. So I want there to be purpose in every season, in every transition. And I think we all want that. We all want a season to make sense for us. We all want our hard work, our introspection, our challenges to eventually lead to something better. So, yeah. And I also think, like I said earlier, being patient with yourself. That was one thing that I had a challenge. I was always ready to get to the next stage. I was always ready to get to the next season. Uh, and I definitely saw that a lot when I was going through, my healing journey through my divorce, where I said, I don't want to be at this place. I don't want to be at this stage. And not realizing, one, how far I had actually come, and acknowledging the work that and the fact that I was able to even identify that I was in a certain season during that time. Because, like I said before, when I was single and, dating, or even like within my marriage, I wasn't really taking the time to pause within myself and be patient. I felt like I always had to have a decision ready. I always had to react to a situation or to change. I felt like I always had to have the solution, and it put a lot of pressure. Uh, it put a lot of pressure on, and I think, especially for those of us that are healing or that is about to go through a major life change or has gone through a major life change, you really have to show yourself grace and compassion and focus more so on how you're handling it versus what is actually happening to you. Because I've always been a believer, right? Life doesn't get easier; you just get better at doing it all. And I think seasons of change sharpens you, it strengthens you, um, it changes you. And I think when we allow ourselves to sometimes sit in it or be gracious, that no one knows the perfect way to handle it, because there really isn't a standard way, right? We're all doing the best that we can with what we know and have, and that's the best that we can. And I saw this quote the other day, that said, "Every season is one of them, but not always one. Be gracious with your every loss." And that's what I think this podcast and the woman in between is about, right? It's, celebrating every single season, because each season is one where we become a better version of ourselves. The past versions of ourselves is still beautiful and is celebrated, while the current version of ourselves is still working towards a future version. It's ever evolving, ever changing, ever growing. And that is I think, once I understood that there's beauty in change and beauty in changing seasons, I've been able to embrace it a lot more and accept, the fact that I wouldn't be placed in this season if I wasn't able. And I think the same for you. And trusting, right, the swift, uncontrollable changes, and knowing that, I'm aligned to God, I'm becoming more aligned to my purpose. So everything is set up to lead me towards that. And I think that's where the mindset piece just really comes into place, right? When it comes to change and navigating through it. And I think no matter what stage, I think of it being as a mother, a wife, divorced, single, um, I being able to look at it as an elevation and evolution, and also understanding that it's temporary. I'm not gonna lie, I can sometimes be so black and white with things, where I will see, for example, like, okay, so I'm about to be in a season of isolation, and I did go through a season of isolation. And in my mind, I was like, I guess this is just how it's gonna be, and became a martyr to that season for a moment. And what was really happening is I wasn't taking advantage of it, because I had just kind of decided, well, this is just what life is, so I'm just going to sit in it. And I think that God brings seasons of change for you to respond, not to sit. And I spent a lot of time sitting on my couch and, processing everything mentally in some ways, but not really asking myself the question, what are you supposed to do in this season? What do you want me to do in this season? And when I realized, okay, this is not going to last always, because one, I'm not a person that, you know, thrives off of isolation. I'm an introvert in the sense that I recharge by being by myself, but I don't actively isolate myself. That's not my personality, right? So that naturally gives me an inclination, like, this is temporary, but also what am I trying to get out of it? And during that time was really a time of healing within myself. Uh, I was at a point where I was still healing my self worth. I was still trying to learn acts of self love. I was in a season of really defining boundaries, and removing relationships from my life. And it was also a time for me to fully recognize what exactly I was in my marriage. And when I started to accept, right, the pause that I needed to take, right? And the space that I needed to create within myself, but also realizing this is not a period to sit, it's a period to be introspective, to be reflective. But I also made it a point to start getting out and exploring and connecting what I was thinking and feeling with what I was actually wanting. And it served me. I I spent time in that season of isolation. And then the next season, you couldn't find me in Dallas. Okay. I was gone. Every other weekend that I didn't have my kids Zoom, I was finding myself and I was in a season of self discovery. So I say all of that to say it is temporary and it grows you, it propels you, it projects you closer to your purpose and to yourself. And then, I think it gives you an opportunity to just really reflect on the past and then really determine what it is that you want out of life in this season and understanding this is temporary and I can respond to this. I don't have to react and accepting that season for what it is and finding worse. And so, as someone that doesn't really love change, to be honest with you, it takes me a while to adapt. I will. I think learning to accept that I know how to pivot and that change doesn't always mean failure. And that alone helped me to feel more empowered. So, right, I think when people talk about, going through a divorce, for example, there is always this conversation about you feel like you were a failure and you feel like you failed your marriage and you feel like you failed your kids, right? And, I definitely felt like I failed myself in some ways because so much of the weight of the success of that marriage was on me. I felt like when in reality it wasn't, right? It takes two people. But I think I did feel like I failed in that way. And it took me a really long time to realize that it wasn't a failure. The fact that I could identify that I was in an environment that wasn't healthy for me, the fact that I could identify that that environment was causing me to not be my best self, which was also impacting my children, that was a win. Finding therapy in that marriage was a huge win for me. So it just goes to show like all of those transitions, as difficult and painful as they were, and even the transitions that, I've gone through post divorce, as my life has evolved. Um, it all serves a purpose, and it also, I think the best way to say it is sometimes change is the actual reason. Like sometimes we need a catalyst to completely change us and propel us forward. And I think the season of change that I went through with my separation, divorce, and then transitioning into a single mom is 1,000% attributed to who I am today. And as painful as it was going through it, it was very much necessary. So I just hope that as we go through seasons, I mean, I know we're in summer now, and whatever season that you are in, you find peace in it. And I hope you have opportunity for reflection, that you can feel the joy of responding, and you can find purpose in it and find yourself at the end of your season a better version of yourself and allowing you to evolve. So that is definitely my goal as I go through my next season. I am really looking forward to this month. I am fortunate to have my kids go to their dads during the summer, for a time period, and it is always an opportunity for me to try to get ahead. And for me, that means having more discipline around my routine so I can get what I need done. And also pouring into myself to just recharge. So I am incredibly excited about the next couple of episodes. Thank you so much for joining the Women in Between. Please continue to follow us on Spotify. Also, follow us on the Women in Between on Insta and TikTok. And I will see you guys on the next Tuesday.